Welcome to the No Risk Sports Performance Podcast, where we discuss all things sports performance, from training to nutrition and recovery to individual and team victories on and off the field. I'm your host, Judah Boulay, owner of No Risk Sports Performance in Lincoln, Rhode Island. I'm ready to roll, so let's do this. Welcome, guys. I'm pretty excited about today's guest. It has been a 11-year journey for this gentleman since I last really connected with him. He was a student at Xaverian Brothers High School, where I was a teacher at. He was a sophomore my first year there, and now he's married, he has a kid, and he's a full-time strength coach at Endicott College up in Boston. And so he's making me feel old today a little bit. But Jack Dustin here was a football player. He went to Assumption for football. And then after he left Assumption, he trained at some local strength and conditioning facilities before going to Coastal Carolina. And now from Coastal Carolina, he ended up at Endicott as a full-time strength coach. So I'm going to let him go a little bit more into his history. So Jack, welcome. Thanks for being here. And let's just fill in all the pieces that I didn't fill in to the audience and tell us a little bit about yourself as well. Thanks.
Yeah, perfect. Well, first off, thanks for having me. It's definitely a pleasure. And you were a huge influence in why I got into this business realistically. As were a lot of people at Xaverian. It was definitely a school where training was super important, not just to, your coaches, but a lot of the other coaches as well, which was very cool to see. Like Coach Boulay said, my name is Jack Dustin. I currently work at Endicott, but when I graduated college, I went to Assumption College, and it was for a business degree. It was in business management. So for me, it was hard to originally see where I wanted to go with it. I knew I wanted to coach. I didn't know if I wanted to coach football, if I wanted to coach strength and conditioning. I just knew I wanted to do some form of coaching to give back. To what the people my mentors had given me. So I went from, that Assumption College football life into, the compete strength. I worked at Compete Strength and Conditioning under Joe. It's in, now it's in Norwood now. When I originally started, it was in Canton. But so for me, that was kind of my awakening. I really started to realize I loved the strength and conditioning aspect of it. I loved the sports performance aspect of it. And then I got this opportunity to go intern down at Coastal Carolina. It was going to be a dual role with football and strength and conditioning. For me, that was kind of huge because I knew I thought at the time, big name and pretty cool that, as your philosophy grows, you can keep pieces that started in the beginning. So when I was down at Coastal, I was doing the football slash strength. So I didn't really have that full understanding of where I was at yet. I just knew I was really enjoying my job and enjoying what I was doing. I was working with a bunch of young men, and we were getting better as a group. And it was pretty cool to be a part of that. And then from there, he kind of said, hey, there's a D-line spot, and you're doing defensive line down there. We'd like you to come back here. And it seemed like a no-brainer at the time. I knew I was enjoying what I was doing at Coastal. So for me to jump to my alma mater was pretty huge. And that's kind of where I started the realization kind of hit me. I wasn't doing as much with the strength and conditioning. I'd help on testing day, and I'd help fill the nutrition center pretty much. So for me, that was kind of when I started to realize it wasn't the football that I loved. I loved the sport of football because I was decent at it. So it was easy for me to be yeah, this is cool and it's fun. But the idea that I loved was the sports performance, the year-long training it's what I remember. Even I remember the hills I ran. I remember, and game-wise, I don't remember all of them. I don't remember the scores of every game. I know the ones where we got our asses kicked, or we had a huge victory. But for me, it was the performance aspect of it, the lifting, the running, the good times you have with the guys over the summer when you're living at college. So I had to make a decision pretty much. And then luckily I got super lucky, and Endicott had a position where they had a defensive line position slash strength and conditioning position. And I was like, I know it's not fully what I want, but maybe it's a start to get my head in the door and have a position that's not labeled intern, which was good for me. It was a time I could grow, a time where I could do kind of see if my systems worked and kind of go from there. And then that role happened to grow into the first time head strength and conditioning role, which obviously now I love what I'm doing. And it's been a huge, just a huge blessing realistically to be where I'm at.
That's awesome. I remember one of the things I remember about you was you were a training room rat. So you lived in the training room um, year round. So it didn't matter what type of season, you always got your lifting in. And your training mentality, I think, helped progress you as an athlete at Xaverian, which is very important. Is important, and I don't think a lot of kids understand the necessity of having a training mindset to be good at sport. They have a playing mindset, but they don't have that training mindset, so they sell themselves short. Do you see that with the college athletes that that you're training now that are coming in as freshmen?
Yeah, I mean, I always tell the athletes, like when they ask, like the first thing they usually ask is, "Were you good at football? Were you sick?" Like, and I'm always like, "No, like it wasn't football that I was good at. I was good at training. Like that's what I grew to love, and I think it was just instilled at me at Severian. Like I said, like we had a bunch of teachers and like that just pushed like, hey, you guys got to go train. You guys got to go do this, and I think that's important. Like understanding like progressions, whether it's in the classroom or in the weight room, like that's what I grew to. Like it's like, hey, like you're not just going to be good at something, like you have to get good at something, and it's all those training hours. So the freshmen we tend to get, some of them are brilliant in the weight room, and some of them are like amazing. Others are a little bit behind, and that's where I think my job's exciting. I like the kid who's already made is it's easy to train him, and it's fun. You can do a little bit more like some of the extra stuff. The guys that aren't as well trained, well, this is where brilliance in the basics really really comes to play. And it's like, hey, like don't get too excited, like start small and continue to grow. And when you see that progression, I think that's where the light switch goes on again. Like you're like, oh wow, like that kid just, I don't know, like pick bench press for instance. Like it's not a super important lift, right? But like if a kid hits 2 plates all of a sudden and you see his eyes light up, like that's a good day. Or if, hey, like they're clean, they finally got the form to the word decent, that's a nice day. Like you see like them getting excited over stuff, like that's pretty awesome, and it's pretty significant. So for the athletes that we're getting, like we have a pretty mixed bag of kids who either are good or aren't as good. It's kind of my job to hopefully get them a little excited either way, about the wins, I guess, is how I always describe it. Like you have victories along the way, and either victories are a learning lesson, right? The weight always wins, as Coach Bernard used to say. Um, so that's kind of how I view it. I think kids sometimes get a bad rep nowadays, the youth, just because I don't know, they're deemed a little different. I guess I think it's more of how they learn. They want everything in quick snippets. Um, so like one of the things I always try and do is I always try and minimize like what I'm saying to them, like using as few keywords as possible, and just trying to get them to focus in on like that. Hey, the one thing that we're trying to win at today, like this is our goal. Let's win at this, and then we'll build off of it.
That's a pretty interesting philosophy. I like that. So when you set up your so do you have any, what's like your training philosophy? So without having like the formal background in strength and conditioning, which might actually be an advantage, because it allows you to have an open mind to training. Um, and you've gone through various different internships and exposures, from personal exposures to the different schools that you did strength work at. What's your training philosophy, or how did you progress or develop your style of training for the athletes that you deal with?
Yes, I mean it's a great question. I think I don't love like for me, it's my philosophy in general, my lifelong philosophy is to be a lifelong learner. So, digging into books, and I think it's, knowing like understanding and mastering the old principles, but learning the new skills is super important. And it's something I think that can be a lost art. So for me, that's kind of my philosophy. And then it's using like just understanding that like brilliance in the basics is what wins. All this fancy stuff we see on Instagram, there's a time and a place. And I don't know, they like those people get bashed consistently, but that's 1% of a program.
Mhm.
Like if you saw a beach workout from, one of our Instagram posts, that's legit. There's nothing to do with the training adaptations. That has everything to do with like a psychological release for the kids to go have fun, be by a beach and run in the sand. I tend to stay to the basics. Um, for me, it's important to get some form of squat, some form of hinge, some form of upper body push, upper body pull, and then some form of a carry and sprint. So like it's super basic, and the squat pattern itself, I don't care if the kid's holding a dumbbell, I don't care if it's a bar on his back, we're going to find a way to progress it to a point where they become they're better at those movements, and hopefully and we can make that transfer to the field. So sprinting's a big piece of what we do, squatting's a big piece of what we do, and we're going to merge those and hopefully marry them in the right way.
What percentage of the time for your athletes that when you work with them, do you work on weights versus like movement principles? Um, in
Yeah,
terms of
that's
like
fair.
when you break up your training for like for what for well, I know it probably varies from sport to sport, but like on average, so for an average team, how do you break it up between movement training versus like weight training?
Yeah, and I think that's obviously a fair question, and we try and be as similar with all of our athletes as possible, as far as like what services they're getting. Because at the end of the day, it is we're selling a service, and it's to a college kid who's already here, but they have to have buy-in. And movement's a huge piece of what we do. We can do a better job. This past year was more difficult with the COVID. We were only able to get 30 minutes per session, and 2 to 3 times a week because we had 830 athletes and we had to get 10 in at a time. We weren't allowed more than 10. So for us, it was, well, how do we break this up? Well, a lot of this is going to be weight room. But our warm up is a movement prep. Like we end up, doing plyos, sprints. And then we also apply those intra workout as well. We're not just doing the major barbell movements. That's never been a major part of what we do. I would say it's the major movements are right around 20%. And then everything else is kind of movement prep, from the way we do mobility to plyometric sides of things to the jumping, the sprinting. We have a hill right outside our weight room that we consistently use for hill sprints.
Sure, the athletes love that.
Yeah, it's a sick setup right before they go, hey, we got a couple hill sprints today. um, and like I said, it's right now it's more due to like the formatting of it's more due to, hey, like how do we have to work around this COVID stuff. Whereas in years past, we've been able to utilize the fields midday, um, and get out onto their surface, whatever it may be, the field, the court. We're working towards, we have a rink on campus, so we'll be doing some ice stuff with the guys and the girls. So that'll be fun as well.
Cool. So, we have mentioned it briefly. Have athletes of all different um, abilities coming in at the freshman year. Is there any area that you're consistently seeing that like where like they lack preparation in, or is it still a mixed bag? Um,
Yeah, I think it's the information they're getting that is like the biggest, like the biggest mixed bag of that we're getting. We have a few athletes that are like phenomenal from day one. There's a good group that are okay. I think that group probably is the group that probably played more sports than actually had like a sports performance coach. And then there's a pretty big drop off at the end where there's a substantial amount of kids that like you surprised how good they are on the field from how poorly they move when you ask them to do something. Um, we have, athletes that run, sub fives pretty easily who have horrible form that could probably run, closer to a 4.5. Like it's all, there's varying levels obviously, but we have, like I said, some are phenomenal movers and then some are not so good. But it's the work ethic at the end of the day that's going to get them to where they need to be, which is pretty cool to see.
Cool. Um, so now for me, I'm a lot older than you. And it's always like looking back at like, like the older generation always looks down and frowns upon the younger generations, so and I just think it's like it happened when I was a kid. I used to hear it, and I guess I've turned into that mindset almost sometimes in some regards. But things have changed obviously, and athletics since even you were in high school. So, how would you compare athletes now back to when like you were a senior in high school in training, or versus when you were in college in training? Is there any differences between the two groups, or what's your experience with that?
Yeah, that's obviously a good question, fully loaded. Um, I try not to, like you said, like I think it's very easy to be like, oh well, our generation was tougher, and I think there is some serious validity to that. I think there are some generations like, I would never say I was tougher than my grandfather. I would never say I was tougher than my own father. Um, but I also think it's maybe not like the toughness level. It might be the information. These athletes have so much information and it's at the click of their hands, and they expect the information so fast, and they also expect to excel so fast. And I think it's just because everything that they have in their hands is so quick. It's that instant gratification, and I don't think it's with sports performance that's not realistic. Like let's put it this way. And excuse my language, but I sucked at football when I first started. Like when you said training helped me get better at sports, that is a fact. I was better at training than I was sports. I ended up playing and starting for 4 years at college. I started for 2 years at Severian. I was a captain of the team in college. But it was all due to the fact that the training progressions. And I think athletes, I think that's where a lot of them are struggling, is they expect that fastness. I don't think it's necessarily that they're not tough enough to push through. I think it's, oh, I failed, and like they're like, well, what's the next step, and they get like down on themselves instead of being like, okay, I messed up, I screwed up, like what's next, like how do I push through.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest difference that I've been seeing is they want it so, like they just want it so fast, and it's not feasible to go from X, an X on a squat to up here on a squat. Like it takes
Right.
time.
Yeah, exactly. And you're gonna, every day is not going to be a PR. And I think that's one of the downfalls of social media, because when they look at social media, most of the time, I think 90% of the time, even higher percentage, you're seeing all the successes
Yeah.
for athletes, and you're not seeing the failed attempts or the failures. And I think the failures make you stronger, and you learn, a failed rep, you learn much more from that than you do sometimes a successful lift. But yeah, I agree. I think it's, that's one of the things, that instant gratification, and changing movement just doesn't happen overnight. It's reps and reps and reps and reps, and it's just building those habits. Um, so was there anything which so how long so you've been at Endicott as a full-time strength coach for how long now?
It's this will be my second full year
Second
as
full
like
year.
the head strength coach. Um, so yeah,
Was
it's
there
been a journey. It's been good.
Right. So when you first started in the weight room, this can go back to like back at Coastal Carolina. Um, what surprised you? What was like your biggest surprise of when you started working with college athletes? Like what was like one of those things where like you walked in the door, something happened, you're like, huh, I wasn't expecting that, and it was like it was a learning experience for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a ton of learning experiences and a ton of surprises along the way. I think, for me, when I first started in the college sector, one, I didn't realize how hard our coaches worked, how much time and effort was put into the preparation behind the scenes. I think as an athlete, you kind of see what you're doing, and not seeing what everyone else is doing. And you're like, oh, we're the hardest workers on campus. We're doing the most. But then you see, hey, the coaches are putting this much preparation in. And then you're like, okay, well, the ADs are putting this much preparation in. And it's like, you're like, okay, like this is different. Like there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that doesn't get shown a lot. And there's obviously like I appreciate every single one of my coaches and love them to death. And it's like, but like it's like they never showed, like they never once showed it. They didn't look tired. They didn't say they were tired. And I think it's one of those things that you don't realize it until you're either a part of it or until after, when you have somebody that's enduring it themselves. Um, at all levels, it like that doesn't actually, at the lower levels it's probably even more, because more is expected. I've seen high school coaches, football coaches working now like hours on end. Same with rugby's and all the other sports. It's amazing like what goes into it, and how much they care. I guess because like you're talking like late hours. Like you might get a text from a kid saying, "Hey, coach, like I messed up. I need help." Like, and it's like, okay, like we'll figure this out. Like, go to bed real quick, right? And in the morning we'll talk about it. Or if it's something that needs to be taken care of right away, take care of it right away. And it's a sacrifice, but it's like that service world, right? You're part of the service industry, and there's a good amount of heart that goes into it.
Um, so do you find that a lot of athletes just because it's funny the dynamic which develops in the training room, and that's like the guys who love to train. There's that camaraderie in the training room, and there's that relationship building with like the coaches that like to train too because of that common the commonality or the common interest. So do you find yourself like being like the ones that um, you get told all like they all the stuff that they don't want to tell their coach or talk about to their coach about, they come to you for that? Or
Yeah, I get a lot of information that I probably shouldn't have. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's they respect you so much, because so the way D3 works, and the way I've started to realize like the information I'm going to get is going to come more and more. I'm around these athletes way more than the coaches are. They're not allowed around them in the off season really. They have a short few weeks where they get maybe like a spring ball or a fall ball, depending on their season. But other than that, they're really not allowed to be around these kids, whereas I am. So there's a barrier of trust that's kind of built up. And a lot of times it's not even them, saying like it's not bad stuff. It's just them telling me something that they may have, in my opinion, should have told the head coach first. But a lot of times they're just looking for advice. And it goes back to the fact that these kids are 18 to 22. And no matter, like, I'm almost 30 and like I still call myself a kid sometimes. I still sit at the kids table on Thanksgiving, which is a good thing. That's a blessing. That means no one's moving on from the adult table. But it's like one of those things, like they're just looking for advice, and they look up to you. And at first I thought it was because I was young, but then I realized I'm not young. I'm almost 30. So they're telling me for a reason. Like they want a piece of advice, or they want a vent. And I'm okay with both of those. I think it's healthy. It leads to, healthier relationship with the head coaches, because these kids feel safe. And safety is a key to, survival. If you don't have that safety zone or that safety net, like nothing's going to go well in your life. You're going to feel very erratic, um, which is pretty cool to be a part of something like that.
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, the relationships like and because I've coached like sport, and it's the same feeling. I'm the old geezer now, even older, but like when I was coaching, at the high school, like you just develop a different rapport with players in terms of like things that they don't want to talk to their parents about, or things they don't want to talk to, um, another teacher, or another, elder. So that it's different dynamic that I think coaches of all ability of all aspects have with their student athletes. I'm gonna throw you on the spot here. So I'm gonna have you like pick one. If you, of all the sports that out there, if you had to pick one, which it was, like if the one sport that it's imperative that they don't skip training outside of their training, their sport, because we both know that like all sports need this, right?
Yeah.
um and if you had to pick one, right, which you're like, you can't miss a training day because of the sport you play, what sport would that be? And I'm just trying to see how biased you are too. So
Yeah, it's actually a really good question. So right now, for me, it would be basketball. Um, the reason I say that is that's the team that I think usually needs to learn probably the most, because it's a sport that's in high school a lot of times played, but there's not a lot of, it seems in my experience so far, not a lot of background of training. Um, so I would say that's probably the group that needs to train, because I think the other groups tend to have that background and at least have a knowledge base where they want to go train. I think basketball is a very unique sport where you can play it at all times. So it becomes very easy to train sport versus train for performance, which I have found very interesting, because you can be a sick basketball player. And I forget who said it, but one of them was like, I don't need to, bench 185 to hit a three. Um, and it's a fact. You don't, like, no way, no how, but you can still get better through lifting. And I think, guys like LeBron, they show that very simply. Like, his career has lasted longer because he probably trains, and he's obviously pedigree, like probably the best that at least that I've seen. Um, so yeah, I think that's probably the sport I would say.
cool, interesting. Now, injury prevention. All right. So, female athletes, as we know, have a higher propensity for knee injuries, based upon genetics and based upon their physical development. And what's your protocol to try to like bulletproof the knees of your female athletes that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I think it's, once again, super fair. I think for us, we obviously understand that with our female athletes, but we also, with our male athletes, we want to bulletproof those knees as well. So a lot of our training is very similar with our females as it is our males. Um, we do believe in training heavy. We think that helps, right? Like, building stronger muscles and structures around the knee is awesome. So that's a big piece of it. We're not like going to scare away from that heavy training. If anything, we might train heavier with the females longer, just due to the fact that they can do it and recover faster from it. Um, but for us, it's a lot of deceleration work, whether it's in the start of the warm up or, doing isometrics mid workout. We'll find ways to bulletproof those things. For us, it comes down to like I said, the deceleration work in the beginning, and then building our way up to, depending on what we're doing that day, making sure that the full range of motion is there, as well as, everything from RDLs to posterior chain type work, and making sure those mechanics are right, but also done at a higher level than the others.
Cool. Yeah. Big. Um, I love working with high school, or like before high school, female athletes, because I think the job of a sports performance coach in that young age, you can have so much impact on them, just in terms of making them less prone for injury and strengthening up like the muscles of the glutes and the posterior, as well as giving them the movement training, so that way like they're you know the the everything tracks the right way from the ankle to the knee to the hip
Yeah.
when they plant. All right. So this has been awesome. I know you're a busy man. We have a youngster at home and a wife, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. So we're gonna finish with the my last questions, which I ask of everyone. So first and foremost, if you had to recommend only one book, which would it be and why? I know you've mentioned that you've done a lot of your learning from reading books. So if you had one book choice, which you had to recommend, what would it be?
So for me, outside of strength and conditioning or inside of strength and
It can
conditioning?
be one book.
All right. So for me, the book I love probably the most is it's called Lead Your Tribe and Love Your Work. Um, it's a good mix of everything. It's on managerial skills. So for me, that book was kind of a good way to be grateful every day. Um, because that's kind of what the book's attitudes toward. It's if you're actually grateful for all the hard work that's being done around you, then you'll realize how hard everyone in your community is working. I am the head strength coach, but I have a ton of so I've got three other strength coaches underneath me, and the work they put in is unreal. And I'm super grateful for everything that they do on a day-to-day basis, because they have other jobs, families that are a part of this, and I think that's pretty significant to really break down your day and be like, hey, like, you should be grateful for everything that's happening. And if like one thing goes wrong, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That just means something in the system has to be fixed. And that's on you as a leader, not on that person or any shortcomings from anyone.
Cool. I'm going to add one extra question here, just because I know the collegiate strength coach, like it's a grind, right? It's long hours. You're working with teams, and you got to do your strength work around the team's practice schedules in season, and it's not always the most convenient hours. How do you find balance in your life between balancing your dedication to your student athletes and your job, which I know you love, as well as your son, your son and your wife, and maintaining that balance between like your job and your work life balance?
Yeah, right now it's a little bit more difficult with the COVID and the way we set up scheduling. Um, but in the past, I've have it pretty nice where I'm at. Um, like I said, like you said, I'm in the college sector. D3, the kids don't tend to stay here as much during the summer, so that's 2 months where I have pretty good amount of freedom. And then the winter break, same deal. It's about 3 to 4 weeks where there's a good range of freedom for myself to make sure that I really harp on those family relationships. But in the school year, I probably start right around 6 a.m. is like the first lift. But I'll be back home probably around 6:20, 6:30. So I have a substantial amount of time in the rest of the night to kind of hang out and make sure that I'm, being a dad, and a husband. And then weekends obviously becomes a huge time, where that we have to make sure that we have time for us, as a family unit, and make sure that we're seeing our parents as well. Um, just to make sure we're staying on top of that. It's definitely something I probably struggle with a little bit. Um, on the end, sometimes the family takes a hit, and then sometimes the work takes probably a little bit of a hit, and it's trying to find, like you said, that balance of making sure that you're not really screwing anything up on either end.
Gotcha. Cool. All right. Do you have a favorite quote, whether it's a personal quote, inspirational quote, motivational quote, just something that like is like your mantra, or something that you always go back to?
Yeah, and there's a ton of quotes out there. Obviously, I think the one for me, um, it's one from Coastal, and like I said, I've got a bunch that I love to reference, but the most dangerous phrase in the language, is "We've always done it this way," and I think that's a huge. There's a lot of stuff packed in there, and you can't you have to be a lifelong learner. You can't consistently be like, hey, like this is why there's going to be a time in our careers where like, hey, like this isn't, you'll look back at what you used to write and you'll be like, okay, why did I write it like that? Like that was not good. Like,
Yeah.
and that's okay. Leave that in the past. Right. But like, don't get stuck on it because you've done it. Like and because people before you have done it, like it's okay to try new things. It's okay to try new systems. And, as long as you stay true to your philosophy, those things should fit in pretty well.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. I like that. That's was that like a football quote, or was it where was that was
So it's by Grace Harper. She was in, I believe, I want to say the English Navy. Not positive on where, but she was military, and it's a pretty cool quote coming from a female um, who's made it into ranks of
yeah, definitely.
men, and breaking those boundaries.
Cool. All right. So last question. Well, two more questions. Your three keys to success. If you had to pick three keys to success in life, in the weight room, or the weight room symbolizes life too. So your three keys to success, what would they be?
So the first one, be a lifelong learner. I think that's super important. If you're not continually learning, then you're not going to grow. The second one, I think, is take risks, which I think kind of runs in line with being a lifelong learner, um, because you'll start to, learn something and you'll be like, okay, well, this could be a risk or this could be, a failure, I guess. And then the third one is just be grateful for everything that you have. I think it's very easy, and this kind of goes back to, I'm kind of like in between, like, that the kids now and like the old generation. I feel like where it's very easy to get caught up in this Instagram life where like you see this instant gratification, you see people on vacation, you see people doing this, and like you want that life like so fast. And it's like, it's okay to work for things. Like it's okay to put the time in. It's okay to like, build. And I think that's super important. And it's hard to be grateful when you're always staring at stuff like that and you kind of want to live, a different life, whether it be a job, a family, whatever it may be. Like everyone's on a different path. And be grateful that you have great friends, be grateful that you have great family, be grateful that you have a great job, be grateful that, you have great support systems and, you've had a great life to this point, and be grateful that you hopefully have more time to create even better journey along the way.
Cool. I like those are awesome. Yeah, I've gotten in the habit of asking everybody the three keys to success. So it's interesting to see the commonalities and then the differences of perspective from person to person. All right, last question. If you could step into my shoes, what is one question you would have asked yourself that I failed to ask you?
I don't think you failed to ask. I think you asked in different ways, but I think the question of like what inspires you, and
Okay.
like just leave it at that. That's the question. It becomes, what's that person's why, which I always think is like super important. And we kind of mentioned it earlier. I like briefed over it, but it's service, right? And it's service to others. Um, I went to a Catholic high school. I went to a Catholic college, and for me, it was, I saw the service around me and what it took to get me to be where I am, from all the other people. Like it took, like, stories of me when I was younger, and it took a lot of people, yourself included. And I didn't even really take any of your classes because it was above my knowledge level. So it's like one of those things that like, it took a ton of people to get me to where I am, never mind, how can I help others now? How can I help somebody else, feel, one, loved, which I felt, hugely from high school on, and two, how do you push, help somebody push past certain boundaries, whether it be physical, mental, or spiritually.
That's awesome. Wow, man, you've come a long way
See?
from just in all regards. So, all right, Jack. Where can people connect with you online? If they want to follow you or reach out to you and ask questions, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah. So through Instagram, I believe it's coach underscore Jack, as in Jack, and then lowercase d. as in Dustin, and then Twitter, Coach_J Dustin or Jack Dustin. And then LinkedIn under Jack Dustin. Those are the three spots I probably frequent the most, sometimes too much. So you can definitely find me there. And anyone who has any questions, I'd love to connect, obviously, with like-minded people and people that want to, for either pursue a career in strength and conditioning or just love the training aspect of it. I always love talking training. So
Cool. All right, Jack, thanks for your time. That was a very awesome episode and lots of insight and knowledge. I'm sure the listeners are going to enjoy that. And I'll make sure to share any snippets with you that I get. So I'm going to sign off here. And that was Jack Dustin, Endicott College head strength and conditioning coach. It was great catching up with him and hearing what he's up to, as well as the tremendous insight he has on the field of strength and conditioning, college athletics and sports performance, as well as just life in general. So until next time, we'll talk to you later. Thanks for listening to the No Risk Sports Performance Podcast. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button, as well as checking out the show notes for more information on our guests. You can find us on Instagram at No Risk Sports Performance. Until next time, I'm your host, Judah Boulay, reminding you to train smart and recover smarter.